Hello and welcome to another episode of The Framework of Tomorrow. I am your host, Keegan Goldfarb, and today I am going to be sharing some war stories in history that you may not have heard of. But before we get into that, I want to talk about my sponsor here on The Framework of Tomorrow. If you're pursuing a higher education or want insight on life as a nurse, go and check out Ashley Luann K at the Minnesota Nurse on Instagram. Not only does it help me out, it helps her out, and it helps the network that I'm in as well. I am in a network called Rally Network. You can check us out at rallynetwork.net. There are some cool podcasts on there, including mine, and BRCM Daily, as well as Donaram. BRCM Daily is a daily podcast. They cover a variety of topics on there, and then Donaram is a video game podcast, and they talk and cover different kinds of video games and topics that are concerning video games. All right. So today, when I was doing the preparation for today's podcast, this is going to be, I think, one of my favorites because there are some really good war stories in today's episode. There's only 3, but they're pretty hefty stories and they're really, really, really good. And I was reading them, I'm like, holy cow! I have the best one for last. Don't worry. So you'll just have to listen to the first 2, which are still really, really, really good. But the third one is 100% the best. So let's hop right into it. So the first one is called The Ghost Army. I believe all of these were in World War II, by the way. Yes, they were all in World War II. So, The Ghost Army. The 23rd Headquarters Special Troop Soldier, this is in the American War, also known as the Ghost Army. So this is American side in World War II. The Ghost Army used fakery and misinformation to deceive the enemy throughout the European theater, full of artists, illustrators, and radio and sound guys plucked from New York and Philadelphia art schools in January 1944. The 1,100-man unit often pretended to be in larger groups with the use of 500-pound speakers that could be heard at a 50-mile radius. All right. So there's 1,100 people in this unit, the 23rd Headquarters Special Troop Unit, that no one knew of, called the Ghost Army, that was included artists, illustrators, radio and sound guys from New York and Philadelphia art schools. That's crazy to me because that would be like me because I'm a sound major, radio and sound major, and so that would be me basically going into the war and becoming this crazy Ghost Army spy. So they had 500-pound speakers that could be heard from a 50-mile radius. They sent fake radio transmissions to distract from actual missions and deployed handmade blow-up tanks and fake observation planes to round out their schemes. They marked their tanks with chalk and sewed on fake patches to pretend to be other units and hide from enemy spies. So they're going through Europe here, and they're wearing different patches to blend in, and they put chalk on their tank as well. And they're just these guys are the pinnacle of spies, and they're just so cool. Prevented from talking about their experience. So this is during this, before the reports became declassified, the majority of the American army was unaware of their existence until former soldier then illustrator Arthur Shillstone wrote about it in 1985. So 40, what is it? What did it say? It started in 45 or 44. So what is that? 41 years after the fact, they finally could talk about this. But can you imagine being in World War II and you're in the army, right? And you're in Europe and you're like, wait, how is that being taken? Or how is these things happening? Like, you're wondering what's going on. And your generals, who are probably the only ones that know about it, if they even know about this thing, they're like, it was another unit. You're like, what? What's going on? The whole German army just got destroyed by this Ghost Army. That's not really what happened, but it's still pretty crazy that they could have had this under the radar and they were successful. They had 1,100 men in it, and they weren't even trained soldiers. Well, I'm sure they were trained, but they weren't intentionally. Well, no one was really intentionally going into World War II. It was draft, but it's funny that they drafted these specific people, like artists and illustrators and stuff like that, and radio guys, sound people as well. I'd say that's a pretty cool one. All right, so that's the first one. The second one, it just gets better from there then on. So it just gets it's more interesting there on. I think the last story is still my favorite though. So number 2, Hans Scharif, the Gentle Interrogator. So Hans Scharif, I think I'm saying his name right. Scharif, I think it's Scharif, was not meant to be a part of the German army. He lived in South Africa with his family, but was drafted when visiting Germany when the war broke out. Can you imagine visiting a country and then just getting drafted into their army? That would really suck. So he's visiting Germany. His wife convinced a general to put him with interpreters instead of front lines. Well, that's good. At least he's not in. He can get put right in the front lines. His wife convinced him. It's so funny he got drafted though. It's so weird. Anyway, so wait, what was his name? Oh, but through a series of mistakes and coincidences, he became the lead interrogator for the Allied pilots failed in France and Germany. Can you imagine being drafted into another country's war that you're not a part of, like their army, and then becoming the lead interrogator? That's insane. And okay, so having seen a prisoner abused when he was an assistant, he vowed against doing the same. So he's an interrogator. He's like, I'm not going to abuse them or take their fingernails off and do horrible, horrible things to interrogate them. Instead, his technique was unique in using kindness and friendly conversation to extract information. Scarif's success in using kindness to get what he wanted has been recently studied and compared to other interrogation techniques. It's been found that not only does one tend to get more information and more accurate information from the prisoner is often unaware of how much information they are giving away. Imagine a movie that explored this unique approach rather than 24 techniques. After the war, Scarif divorced and moved to the United States, then marrying an American and finding success in a new career as a mosaic artist. And one of his works appears in the Magic Kingdom castle at Disney World. That's really cool. So this guy had an interesting life. He went to Germany to go and visit, and then gets drafted in the German war, and then becomes the lead interrogator. And then instead of being like all of the other interrogators during the time, he decided to use conversation, being friendly to the people, and then was successful in that. He got out of the German army, moved to the United States, and then married an American woman, and then became a Mosaic who got one of his works in Magic Kingdom Castle at Disney World. That right there is a story that's such a cool story. I wish this man was my grandfather, and he would be like, well, back in my day, I got drafted in the German war and became a lead investigator by accident, and then instead of beating them up, use kindness. And then I arrived in the United States, and I got featured in the castle at Disney World. That right there is an interesting life. Very interesting. So then the third one here is my personal favorite, and it's so cool. It's so cool. All right. You're not even ready for this story. So the title of the story is Topped by Real Life When... All right. That's what it's called. Imagine if Helm's Deep had only been defended by 24 guys and an enemy crossed the sheer overwhelming math of a zombie horde with the Empire's propensity for terrifying martial efficiency. Okay, I'm just gonna say that. That's what one Sergeant Yakov Pavlov's platoon found themselves facing in September of 1942. So this is the story of Pavlov. If you've never heard of him, I'm sure you've heard that word before. But Yakov Pavlov. This is the story of his platoon. The Nazis were pushing into Russia, 1942, as a part of the biggest military operation in history of the human race, and everything was about to come to a head in the city of Stalingrad with a battle over a single bombed-out apartment building. Pavlov and his platoon were tasked with the thankless job of retaking the building after the Nazis had seized it. To get a snapshot of what their mindset was like heading in, it's helpful to know that the assignment was considered an extremely dangerous one by the Soviet Army, and the Soviet Army's slogan at the time was "Die for Russia." So this was an extremely dangerous task. Their main slogan, they probably said it every day, was "Die for Russia, die for Russia." And then and they get tasked for this to go seize a building the Nazis had taken. Doing the quick math, good job Pavlov. Doing the quick math, Pavlov realized his only chance was to throw his whole platoon into the meat grinder and hope that the speed with which they passed through left a few alive. That is what it means to die for Russia, is to basically just go ahead in. They didn't even care. They were just going in. Like, that's why Russia was so effective in World War II, and probably would still be today, because that's the mindset they have. He lost all but 4 men in his platoon. I don't know how much he had at the start, but all but 4 men in the assault. But eventually his plan worked and they took the building. Had they known they were dealing with a man who considered 4 people surviving a success, the Nazis probably would have realized that they were in for some serious doo-doo. Having barely enough survivors to outfit a respectable zombie movie, Pavlov could only station 1 soldier to each floor. So there's 4 floors, right? Or there's three floors, I think, including... Or wait, no. I don't know what I'm saying. There's 4 floors, right? And 4 soldiers on each floor had to hold their own ground. And Pavlov's like, go and do that. So, however, the drop-dead gorgeous line of sight it offered was enough for them to unleash a mountain of unholy hell against all fascist comers. So they had a really good line of sight while they were up there, and that's basically how they survived. The building was subjected to relentless fire, as were the civilians huddled in the basement. But Pavlov's unit held out long enough to be reinforced by a small, tiny 25 men. Remember, this is the whole German army being like, we want this building. And they're just like, that's my commentary. Not a wizard, but it was all they needed. His men were given machine guns, rifles, mortars, barbed wire, and anti-tank mines, some body armor, and a PTRS-41 anti-tank rifle, which Pavlov personally used to snipe a dozen tanks from the rooftop. So, just to put that in perspective, there was more than a dozen tanks that were going after this building, and there's 4 of them. Not including all of the soldiers that are probably pouring into this place. They basically used what little equipment they had to convert the apartment into a anti-Nazi death machine that could annihilate whatever came at it from a kilometer in every direction. As long as everyone conserved their ammo and manned their post, the only real danger posed to the building came from flamethrowers. Fortunately, the legendary sniper 19-year-old Antony Chekhov on the top floor usually resulted in Viking funeral for the Nazis. 19-year-old Antony Chekhov, 19 years old, and he was on the building just sniping the Nazis. Can you imagine 19-year-olds just destroying you? Wave after wave, the German army hammered the building and died. Later, Pavlov's men could boast that they killed more Germans defending their one building than the French killed in the entire fall of Paris. And unfortunately for French egos, they were still alive to boast by February 2nd the next year. The Battle of Stalingrad was over. Pavlov was named the hero of the Soviet Union, and the building he defended was made into a monument, as it should be. That man deserves a monument. All of those guys do. That's insane. 4 Pavlov and 4 men. That's nuts. I can't believe they killed more Germans defending their one building than the French killed in the entire fall of Paris. I love how it roasts the French people as well. They deserve it. They were kind of wimpy. If you don't know about history, the French are a little wimpy. So what does this mean for the future? Of course, these are stories. I think we can learn from them and realize that, holy cow, there are some really cool and really amazing veterans we have in our wars, and especially in the United States. And what you should do this week is find a veteran you know or someone in the Army and thank them for their service. And remember, they could be one of these people. And of course, this is in World War II, but it's crazy. All these 3 stories were insane, and I think that these stories should continue to be told, and they should be remembered for their sacrifice and their bravery. So here's the random history fact today, as I always do on my podcast at the end of the episode. This is a World War One. One more World War One. Wait, no, it's not. Just kidding. It's just a stat. Only 20% of the males born in the Soviet Union in 1923 survived the war. Only 20%. 80% died. I just told you the story of the Russians and how they just threw themselves. Probably 80% or 20% of Pavlov's unit survived. So that's probably true. Probably less than that. So that's probably why only 20% of the males born in the Soviet Union in 1923 survived the war. That's really sad, but Russia did get their work done, but at what cost? They died for Russia, I guess. Anyway, thank you so much for listening to this episode. I really hope you enjoyed it. I know I did. I really loved this episode. Make sure to check me out on Instagram at The Framework of Tomorrow. You can DM me there. You can also find me on Twitter at the TFOT_podcast, the Framework of Tomorrow, the abbreviation of The Framework of Tomorrow on Twitter. You should follow me there. I just recently got all of my episodes on YouTube as well. You can just find me at The Framework of Tomorrow on there, and you can go subscribe, comment, like, all that. Make sure to go rate me 5 stars on iTunes. It really helps me out. Or rate me anything. If you didn't like my podcast, rate me 1 star. But either way, it helps me out, so you should definitely go do that. And I would love some constructive criticism, so you should really go do that. And if you want to, you can say in your comment that you want to be shout out at the beginning of my episode, and I will do that. I upload every Monday and Wednesday at 5 a.m. And make sure to have a fantastic rest of your week, and make sure to tune in on Wednesday for another fantastic episode of The Framework of Tomorrow.